It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Washington, D.C. The golden leaves danced through the air as crowds gathered near the White House for a charity event organized by First Lady Melania Trump. The event, aimed at supporting underprivileged children, had drawn families from different walks of life. Parents and children eagerly waited their turn to meet the First Lady, whose calm demeanor and elegance always seemed to bring a sense of peace. Among the children present was a little girl named Emily. She was no older than 8, with deep blue eyes and golden curls that bounced as she walked. Emily had been through more than any child her age should. Her father, a soldier, had died in Afghanistan when she was just 5, and her mother, struggling to make ends meet, had brought her to the event in the hopes of finding a moment of joy amid their difficult life. As Emily clutched a small note in her tiny hands, her mother gently nudged her forward. "Go on, sweetheart," she whispered with encouragement. Emily swallowed her nervousness and stepped toward the First Lady, who was engaged in conversation with another child. When Melania turned her gaze toward Emily, her warm smile was both welcoming and reassuring. "Hello, my dear," Melania said, kneeling slightly to be at the girl's eye level. "What is your name?" Emily hesitated for a moment, her fingers clutching the edges of her note. "I'm Emily," she said softly. Melania's eyes twinkled. "It's lovely to meet you, Emily. How are you today?" Instead of answering, Emily held out the small note with trembling hands. "I wrote this for you," she said. Melania took the note gently, unfolding the piece of paper. As she read the first few lines, her expression softened, and she glanced back at Emily with curiosity. The note read, "Dear Mrs. Trump, I have a question, but I am too scared to ask. My daddy is in heaven. Mommy says he is with God. But how do we know God is real? And if he is, does he love me too? Love, Emily." Melania's breath caught in her throat. She looked up to see Emily's hopeful yet teary-eyed expression, and in that moment, she knew that this was more than just a child's innocent question. It was a cry for reassurance, for love, for something greater than the pain the little girl had endured. Taking a deep breath, she reached for Emily's small hands. "That is a very important question, Emily," she said gently, "and I would love to answer it for you." Melania Trump held Emily's tiny hands, feeling the warmth and the vulnerability in them. The crowd around them hushed slightly, sensing that something meaningful was unfolding. The First Lady, known for her composed and graceful presence, took a deep breath and gave the little girl a reassuring smile. "Emily," she began softly, "your question is one that many people, adults and children alike, wonder about. You are very brave for asking it." Emily's blue eyes shimmered as she listened intently, her little fingers tightening around Melania's hand. The First Lady continued, "You asked how we know that God is real. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt love so strong that it makes you feel safe, even when you are sad?" Emily hesitated for a moment and then nodded. "When my mommy holds me at night, I feel safe," she whispered. Melania smiled. "That feeling of love, that warmth in your heart, that is God. He is love, Emily. He is there, even when we can't see him. Just like the wind. You can't see it, but you can feel it when it touches your face. That's how God is. He is always with you, always loving you." Emily's lips parted slightly, as if she were processing something deeper than she had ever considered before. "But why did he take my daddy away?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit Melania's heart like a wave. She knew she had to answer carefully. The weight of grief on a child's shoulders was something no words could fully lift, but she could offer comfort. "My dear Emily," she said, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from the child's face, "I don't know why things happen the way they do. Sometimes, life gives us questions that are hard to answer. But I do know this. Your daddy loved you very much, and love never goes away. It stays with us, in our hearts, in our memories, and in the kindness we show others." Emily blinked, looking down at her tiny hands. "So, even if I can't see him, he's still here?" Melania nodded. "Yes, sweet girl. He is in your laughter, in the love your mother gives you, and in every beautiful moment you experience." And I truly believe he is watching over you, proud of the person you are becoming. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, but Melania squeezed her hand reassuringly. Crying is okay, she said softly. It means your heart is full of love. The little girl sniffled, her face lifting into the faintest smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. As Melania gently wrapped Emily in a hug, the crowd watched, some with teary eyes of their own. The moment was not political, not rehearsed, not staged. It was simply human. A woman offering comfort to a grieving child. And in that embrace, the presence of something far greater was felt. As Melania held Emily close, the little girl let out a small, shaky breath, as if releasing a weight she had carried for far too long. The First Lady could feel her tiny frame relax slightly, and she gently pulled away to look into Emily's eyes. You are never alone, Emily, she said softly. Even when it feels like the world is too big and too hard, God is always with you, holding your heart just like this. She placed her palm gently over Emily's chest. Every time you feel love, every time you show kindness, he is there. Emily bit her lip, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. But how do I talk to him? If he's there, how do I know he hears me? Melania's expression softened even more. Talking to God is like talking to someone who loves you more than anything, she said. You don't need fancy words. You don't even need to speak out loud. You just need to open your heart and tell him what you feel. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Like a secret? Melania smiled. Yes, like a special secret between you and God. He always listens, and even when you don't hear him right away, he answers in little ways. Through a kind word, a warm hug, or even a moment when you suddenly feel a little bit braver. Emily's face lit up with curiosity, and for the first time, there was a spark of hope. Can I try? The First Lady nodded. Of course. The crowd around them had grown quiet, as if the world itself was pausing to witness this moment. Emily closed her eyes tightly, her little hands clutched in front of her chest. No one could hear what she was saying. Not Melania, not her mother, not the reporters who had lowered their cameras out of respect. But they could see it, the sincerity in her tiny face, the raw vulnerability of a child speaking straight from the heart. A few moments passed, and then Emily opened her eyes, blinking up at Melania with a look of wonder. I feel warm inside, she whispered. Melania reached out and gently cupped Emily's cheek. That is love, she said. That is God. Emily looked down at the little note she had given to Melania earlier. She traced the edges with her fingers and then held it up. Can you keep this? She asked softly. Melania smiled, folding the note carefully and placing it inside her pocket. I would be honored, she said, and I will always remember this moment. The little girl nodded, then suddenly, without hesitation, threw her arms around Melania once more. The First Lady, moved beyond words, hugged her back tightly, feeling a deep sense of purpose in that simple embrace. A tear escaped down Melania's cheek. She didn't wipe it away, and in that moment, under the golden autumn sky, the First Lady and the little girl stood together. One seeking answers, the other offering comfort. Two hearts connected, bound by faith, love, and an understanding that some things, no matter how painful, are never faced alone. As the embrace between Melania and Emily ended, a soft sniffle was heard nearby. Emily's mother, Sarah, stood just a few feet away, pressing a hand to her lips. Her eyes were filled with unshed tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. She had seen her daughter struggle with questions about life and loss, questions Sarah herself didn't always have answers for. But today, in the span of a few moments, she had witnessed something she hadn't seen in a long time: hope in Emily's eyes. Melania noticed Sarah's expression and extended a hand toward her. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and took the First Lady's hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. You have no idea what this means to us. Melania smiled warmly. Your daughter is a very special girl, she said. She carries so much love in her heart. Sarah nodded, glancing at Emily, who was still standing close to Melania, as if she didn't want to leave. She has been struggling, Sarah admitted. Ever since we lost her father, she has been asking me so many questions about God, about heaven, about why things happen the way they do. And I didn't always know what to say. Melania's expression softened. Sometimes, there are no perfect answers, she said. But love is always an answer. Sarah let out a small, shaky laugh, nodding in agreement. I just want her to know she's not alone. The First Lady knelt down again to meet Emily's gaze. You are never alone, sweet girl, she reassured. And your mother loves you more than anything in this world. You are so loved. Emily smiled, her small fingers reaching for her mother's hand. Sarah pulled her close, wrapping her arms around her daughter as if she never wanted to let go. Melania watched the two of them, feeling something stir deep within her. This was what her role as First Lady was truly about. Not politics, not speeches, but moments like these. Moments of real connection, where love and kindness could make all the difference. A few feet away, the event organizers gestured that it was time for Melania to continue greeting the rest of the children waiting in line. She nodded but then turned back to Emily. Would you like me to pray with you before you go? She asked softly. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. You would do that? Melania smiled and reached for both Emily's and Sarah's hands. They bowed their heads together, and in that brief moment, with cameras clicking and people watching, the world outside seemed to pause. The First Lady's voice was soft but steady. Dear God, thank you for Emily and her beautiful heart. Thank you for her mother, who loves her so much. Please watch over them and remind them that they are never alone. Let Emily feel your love always, and may she always know how precious she is. Amen. When they lifted their heads, a single tear ran down Emily's cheek. But this time she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she smiled a real, genuine smile. Thank you, Mrs. Trump, she said, her voice full of something new, something stronger. Melania gently brushed a hand over Emily's curls. You are welcome, sweet girl. As Emily and Sarah turned to leave, Sarah looked over her shoulder one last time. You made a difference today, she whispered. Melania simply smiled. And as she turned to greet the next child in line, she felt something deep within her heart. Maybe Emily wasn't the only one who had needed this moment. Maybe, in some way, she had needed it too. As Emily and her mother walked away, Melania took a deep breath, composing herself before turning back to the line of children waiting to meet her. Yet, something inside her had shifted. The little girl's innocent yet profound question had reminded her of something powerful. Faith is not just about what we believe. It's about how we share love and kindness with others. As she continued greeting children, handing out small gifts, and listening to their stories, she couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's words would stay with her forever. Nearby, a few journalists who had witnessed the exchange between Emily and Melania murmured among themselves. One of them, a reporter named Daniel Carter, had been covering political events for years, but today was different. He wasn't watching a political figure giving a rehearsed speech. He had just witnessed a deeply human moment. That was unexpected, he muttered to a fellow journalist. His colleague, Sarah Matthews, nodded. She really meant it. You could see it in her eyes. Daniel hesitated, then lifted his camera and zoomed in on Emily and her mother walking away. The little girl was holding tightly to her mother's hand, but something had changed. The way she walked, the way she held herself. It was as if she carried something new. A quiet strength, a reassurance that she wasn't alone. Sarah nudged him. You should write about this, she said. Daniel frowned. This wasn't about policy. It wasn't about politics. Exactly, Sarah said with a small smile. Maybe that's why it matters. Meanwhile, Emily and her mother made their way toward a small bench near the park. Sarah knelt down in front of her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. How do you feel, sweetheart? She asked softly. Emily looked up at her mother, her blue eyes shining. I feel okay, she said after a moment. Then she smiled. Maybe even a little bit happy. Sarah let out a soft laugh, wrapping her daughter in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "And I know your daddy is too." Emily nodded, looking down at the small bracelet she always wore, one that had belonged to her father. She held it for a moment, then closed her eyes. "Hi, Daddy. I miss you, but I think I know now that you're still here." When she opened her eyes, she wasn't sad. Instead, she felt warm, as if an invisible hug was wrapped around her. And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed she was not alone. Back at the event, as Melania continued greeting children, a quiet voice whispered in her mind. Emily's words, innocent yet profound. "How do we know God is real?" As she smiled at the next child in line, handing them a small toy, she realized something. She had always believed in kindness, in love, in the unseen strength that holds people together. Maybe that's what faith truly was. Not just believing in something bigger, but being that love, that warmth, that light for someone else. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best way to show that God was real after all. Shall I continue with later that evening? As the sun dipped below the Washington skyline, Melania Trump sat in her office, reflecting on the day's events. The White House staff had already begun compiling media reports from the charity event, and as she scrolled through the headlines, something caught her eye. One particular article stood out. It was written by Daniel Carter, the journalist who had quietly observed her conversation with Emily. The title read, "A First Lady's Answer to a Little Girl's Big Question and Why It Matters." Intrigued, Melania clicked on the link and began reading. At a time when political conversations dominate the airwaves, it's easy to forget the power of simple, human moments. Today, I witnessed one such moment, one that had nothing to do with policies, campaigns, or debates. It was about faith, love, and the kind of reassurance that every person, especially a child, deserves to feel. A little girl named Emily, no older than 8, asked First Lady Melania Trump a question that stopped time for a brief moment. How do we know God is real? It was not a question of politics or religion, but one of innocence and loss. Emily had lost her father, a soldier, and was searching for an answer to ease the ache in her heart. What followed was something rarely seen in public life. The First Lady did not offer a rehearsed statement or a vague response. She knelt beside the child, looked into her eyes, and spoke from the heart. She told Emily that God is found in love, the love of her mother, the kindness of others, the warmth in her heart. And as I watched, I saw something remarkable happen. A little girl who had carried the weight of loss for too long suddenly stood a little taller, smiled a little brighter, and, for the first time in a long time, looked like she believed she was not alone. In that moment, the First Lady was not a political figure. She was simply a person, offering comfort to a grieving child in the most human way possible. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real message we all needed to hear today. Because in a world filled with uncertainty, where division and doubt often cloud our days, sometimes the simplest answer is the most profound. Love is real. And if love is real, then perhaps, just perhaps, God is too. Melania let out a soft breath as she finished reading. She had not expected their conversation to become public, but she was grateful. Not because of the attention, but because Emily's question, one that so many people, young and old, had likely asked themselves, was now out in the open. Maybe the story would reach someone else who needed to hear it. Maybe another little girl, or even an adult, would read those words and feel the same comfort that she had hoped to give Emily. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of her aides. "Mrs. Trump, the story about you and Emily is going viral. People from all walks of life are sharing their own experiences of loss and faith. Thought you'd want to know." Melania smiled softly, setting her phone down. It wasn't about going viral. It was about something much bigger. Somewhere out there, Emily was probably asleep, curled up in her bed, feeling a little less alone than she had that morning. And that, Melania thought, was enough. By the next morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. Social media was flooded with comments from people sharing their own experiences of faith, loss, and moments of unexpected comfort. Emily's story was no longer just hers. It had become a shared experience for thousands, even millions, who had at some point wondered about the same question. Is God real? Melania's social media team had been monitoring the reactions overnight, and one of her aides approached her at breakfast with an update. "Mrs. Trump," the young woman said, placing a tablet in front of her. "The response to yesterday's event has been overwhelming. We've received thousands of messages, letters, emails, even calls, from people who were deeply moved by your conversation with Emily." Melania sipped her tea before glancing at the screen. Messages from veterans, single parents, teachers, and even atheists filled the feed. Some were thanking her, some were questioning, and some were simply sharing their own stories. One letter in particular caught her eye. It was from a woman named Linda, a schoolteacher in Texas. "Dear Mrs. Trump, I watched a video clip of you speaking with little Emily yesterday, and I found myself in tears. I lost my husband 10 years ago in a car accident, and my son, who was only 5 at the time, asked me the very same question. How do we know God is real? I didn't know what to say then. I was so lost in my own grief that I couldn't find the words to comfort him. But when I heard you speak to Emily, I realized something. I don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes all we need is love. My son is now 15, and after watching your conversation, we sat down and talked about it for the first time in years. Thank you for reminding us that faith isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about believing in the love that never leaves us. With gratitude, Linda H." Melania exhaled slowly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She had simply spoken from the heart, never expecting her words to reach beyond that one little girl. But now, they were touching lives she had never met, rekindling conversations long forgotten. Another message appeared, a tweet from a young Marine. "Lost my dad when I was 8, been angry ever since. But this story made me think about him differently. Maybe love never really leaves us. Maybe he's still here. #faith, #love is real." Melania set the tablet down and looked out the window, deep in thought. This was bigger than politics, bigger than speeches. It was something universal, something deeply human. Emily sat at the breakfast table with her mother, sipping orange juice as the morning news played in the background. She was only half listening until she suddenly heard her own name. Her eyes widened as the news anchor spoke. A simple conversation between First Lady Melania Trump and an 8-year-old girl named Emily is touching hearts across the nation today. After asking a heartfelt question about God and receiving a response that moved both her and those around her, Emily's story has gone viral, sparking discussions about faith, loss, and the power of love. Emily's mouth dropped open. "Mommy, they're talking about me." Sarah turned toward the screen, her own face mirroring her daughter's shock. She had never expected their moment with the First Lady to become a national conversation. Emily frowned slightly. "Do you think Daddy saw it?" Sarah's heart ached at the question, but she smiled and brushed a hand through Emily's hair. "I think if love never really leaves us, then yes, he saw it, sweetheart." Emily's face brightened at that thought. She picked up the small bracelet she always wore, the one that had belonged to her father, and held it close. For the first time, instead of just remembering what she had lost, she felt the presence of what she still had. And for an 8-year-old girl who had spent years feeling empty, that made all the difference. Later that afternoon, as Melania finished up a meeting in the East Wing, one of her aides knocked on the door, carrying a stack of letters. "Mrs. Trump," she said with a smile, "Emily and her mother have been receiving a lot of support from people across the country. Schools, churches, even military families have reached out to them. And well, Emily's mother sent this for you." She handed Melania a small, neatly folded note. The handwriting was childish yet careful, and when she opened it, she recognized the same little heart Emily had drawn on her first note. "Dear Mrs. Trump, I just wanted to say thank you. My mommy and I saw the news, and I didn't know so many people cared. I feel happy. Not because of the TV, but because I think Daddy would be proud. I talk to God now, like you said. Even if I can't see him, I think he listens. I hope I can see you again one day. Maybe we can talk more about God. Love." Emily. Melania's heart warmed as she read the note. She knew she had to do something special. She turned to her aide. "I want to invite Emily and her mother to the White House. she said decisively. The aide's eyes widened. That would be incredible. Maybe for a private visit. Melania nodded. Yes, I'd like to speak with Emily again. Not as a first lady, but just as someone who cares. Emily had never been anywhere as grand as the White House. She held her mother's hand tightly as they stepped through the large doors, her eyes as wide as saucers. The marble floors, the glittering chandeliers, and the paintings of past presidents all made her feel like she had walked into a fairy tale. Are we really here, Mommy? She whispered in awe. Sarah squeezed her hand. Yes, sweetheart. This is real. A staff member led them through the East Wing, and soon, they arrived at a private sitting room. And there, waiting for them with a warm smile, was Melania Trump. Emily grinned and ran forward, wrapping her small arms around Melania without hesitation. Melania let out a soft laugh as she hugged the little girl. It's so good to see you again, Emily. Emily pulled back, her eyes shining. I wanted to thank you in person, she said, for talking to me that day. Melania knelt down so they were at eye level. You never have to thank me for that, sweet girl. Your question was very special, and I'm glad we could talk about it. Emily nodded enthusiastically. I've been talking to God more, and I think I feel him now. Melania smiled warmly. That makes me very happy. Sarah wiped a tear from her eye as she watched the exchange. I can't tell you how much that day meant to us, she said softly. Emily has been different since then. More at peace. Melania nodded, taking Emily's small hands in hers. Sometimes, all we need is to know that we are loved and never alone. Emily's face lit up with curiosity. Do you ever talk to God, Mrs. Trump? The First Lady's expression softened. Yes, Emily, I do. Every day. Emily's eyes widened. What do you say? Melania paused for a moment before answering. I pray for my family, for my son. I pray for our country. And I pray for people like you. People who need to feel love and hope. Emily smiled. That's a nice prayer. The three of them sat together for a little while, talking about God, life, and the people they loved. It was not a political conversation. It was not a scripted event. It was simply a moment of kindness, faith, and human connection. Before Emily left, Melania reached into a small box on the table and pulled out a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a heart. This is for you, Emily, she said, fastening the necklace around the little girl's neck. Whenever you feel alone, hold it close and remember, you are never truly alone. Emily clutched the necklace tightly and smiled. Thank you, Mrs. Trump. As she and her mother walked back through the grand halls of the White House, Emily felt something new, something stronger than sadness. Hope. She turned back one last time and waved at Melania. The First Lady waved back, watching as the little girl disappeared down the hallway. And as she stood there in the quiet, Melania whispered a small prayer of her own. Thank you for bringing her into my life. The story of Emily's visit to the White House spread quickly. News outlets covered it not as a political event, but as a human story, one that resonated deeply across America. People from all walks of life, from small-town families to soldiers overseas, shared their thoughts on social media. Many spoke of their own struggles with faith, loss, and finding meaning in the midst of hardship. One tweet from a mother in Kansas stood out. I lost my husband in the line of duty. My son has asked me the same question Emily asked. I never knew what to say, but after hearing what the First Lady told her, I think I finally have an answer. Hashtag love is real, hashtag faith still matters. Church leaders, military families, and even skeptics found themselves talking about the conversation between the First Lady and the little girl. Some debated it, others simply appreciated it for what it was, a moment of genuine human connection in a world often divided. Even late-night television hosts, who were usually critical of the First Lady, approached the story with uncharacteristic warmth. One host, known for his sharp wit, spoke about it on air. We live in a time when headlines are full of negativity, but this was different. A little girl asked a question that many of us have probably wondered about, and instead of brushing her off or giving a textbook answer, Melania Trump gave her something real. She gave her comfort. And whether you agree with her politics or not, you have to respect that. Melania herself remained quiet on the public response. She had never intended for her conversation with Emily to become a national discussion. But as she watched the outpouring of messages and stories, she realized something. Emily's question had opened a door for many people. She called her aide into the room. "I want to do more," she said simply. The aide tilted her head. "More?" Melania nodded. "I want to help children who are grieving, children who need to feel they are not alone." The aide's face lit up. "That's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Trump. Perhaps through your Be Best initiative." Melania thought for a moment. "Yes, but I also want to do something personal. Something for Emily and children like her." The idea formed in her mind, and within days, a new project was announced. Letters of Love. A national initiative for children facing loss and grief. The initiative encouraged children who had lost a parent or loved one to write letters. Letters of questions, of pain, of hope. And in return, they would receive letters of encouragement, faith, and love from people across the country. Melania hoped that by creating a space for these conversations, children like Emily wouldn't have to feel alone in their grief. And as the letters began pouring in, one thing became clear. Emily's question had not only touched the First Lady's heart, it had touched the heart of a nation. A month after Emily's visit to the White House, something extraordinary happened. Melania Trump sat in her office, looking through stacks of letters that had arrived as part of the Letters of Love initiative. Thousands of children had written in. Some had lost parents to war, some to illness, and others had simply wanted reassurance that they were not alone in their struggles. One letter stood out. It was from a 10-year-old boy named Ryan, whose father, a firefighter, had died in the line of duty. "Dear Mrs. Trump, my dad was my hero. He saved people, but he couldn't save himself. I miss him every day. I never used to talk about it because I thought people would forget about him if I stopped being sad. But then I saw Emily's story. I saw how she talked about her dad, and how you told her love never goes away. I think maybe that's true. Maybe my dad is still here in the way I remember him, in the way I try to be brave like he was. Thank you for telling Emily that love never leaves us. Because now I think I believe it too. Love." Melania placed the letter down and exhaled deeply. A quiet, meaningful smile crossed her face. She turned to her aide. "I want Emily to see this." Meanwhile, in Virginia, Emily was at school when her mother received an unexpected phone call from the White House. "Mrs. Turner, this is an official request from the office of the First Lady. Melania Trump would like to send Emily a special package and a message, if that's all right." Sarah was speechless. Of course, she would be honored. A few days later, a carefully wrapped package arrived at their home. Inside was a handwritten letter from Melania, along with Ryan's letter. "Dear Emily, I wanted to send you something special today. Do you remember when you asked me if God is real? That question touched more people than you can imagine. Since then, so many children have written letters just like you did. I want you to meet someone. His name is Ryan. He lost his father too, but after hearing your story, he started to believe in something important. That love never really leaves us. Emily, you started something special. You showed the world that even the smallest voice can make a big difference. And I want you to know, I will always remember you. With love, Melania Trump." Emily read the letter twice, her fingers tracing the words carefully. Then she looked at Ryan's letter, her eyes welling with tears. Not of sadness, but of something deeper. Hope. She turned to her mother. "Can I write back to Ryan?" Sarah pulled her daughter into a hug. "Of course, sweetheart. I think he would love that." A lasting impact as the weeks passed. The Letters of Love initiative grew into something much bigger than anyone had expected. Schools began incorporating letter writing into their grief counseling programs. Military families, who had lost loved ones in service, started connecting through shared experiences. Even people who had once questioned faith began reconsidering the power of love and human connection. And at the center of it all was one simple question from an 8-year-old girl. How do we know God is real? Though she may never fully understand the impact of that moment, Emily had helped change lives. And perhaps, in some way, That was the answer she had been searching for all along. Epilogue. A Christmas surprise that December, Emily and her mother were invited back to the White House for a special holiday event. As they stepped inside the grand hall, decorated with twinkling lights and evergreen garlands, Emily spotted a familiar figure. Melania Trump stood near a massive Christmas tree, speaking with guests. But the moment she saw Emily, her face lit up. She bent down and opened her arms, and without hesitation, Emily ran straight into them. "You came back," Melania whispered. Emily nodded, hugging her tightly. "I had to. I wanted to say thank you. Again." Melania smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "You never have to thank me, sweet girl. This," she gestured around them, at the joy and warmth that filled the room. "This is because of you." And as they stood together, beneath the soft glow of Christmas lights, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because now she truly believed that love never leaves us. And if love is real, then maybe, just maybe, God is too.